that we were going to start at 12, regardless of if they're late. If they come late, they'll be invited to join us late. It's the only thing we have, a lot of questions. Since there's less candidates than we expected, we had pre-prepared questions. We will, if less candidates come, we will probably open up to the audience for questions. But originally we had prepared this with timing, presuming there were nine of the candidates who confirmed, and they each had a certain amount of time for a certain amount of questions. So we're still going to start on time, despite the fact the candidates aren't here, because HCAN, we like to do stuff on time. So, anyway, thank you for coming. Start.
Shall we get started?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Ann Wright, a longtime Ardmore resident and HCAN member. The Haverford Area Community Action Network is what the acronym HCAN stands for, and our mission is working together to promote progressive values in our community. We are a nonpartisan organization, and we will not endorse any candidate. But we believe strongly, as clearly your behavior demonstrates, that an educated voter is good for all of us. So special thanks to each of you for being here today, being on time, and thwarting last night's weather to continue your own learning about these candidates. We're especially grateful to you candidates for showing interest in our district and for being here despite that weather. I expect others will join you. There's lots of interest. That can only be a good thing. Thank you so much to each of you. And some housekeeping details while we get started. There are as many seats as we've got. If those run out, folks are welcome to stand as capacity. Restrooms are that way. This is a library, so we're going to have those doors remain closed to honor the etiquette of the library. I'm glad I'm not out there studying for finals. And there will be a basket, a cookie basket. Where did it go? Yep, circulating, so that we'd ask you possibly to join in a goodwill offering, all for Ludington Library, none of it to HCAN, to be able to show our gratitude for use of the room today. Our approach. Our goal is to get as much information from all of you in the amount of time we've allotted, 12 to 2. We're going to use that by using two types of questions. And actually, our candidates are hearing this for the first time, so pop quiz moment. Let me say before I go to the types that we're going to dispense with any introductory remarks and jump right into content. You're impatient. They've got a lot to say. We decided instead to put on your seat the biographies of each of the candidates. I do have one edit that if you look at the slip on your lap, and look at candidate number 9 to my right, David Wertheim. So we got David's wrong. We pulled something that was slightly outdated from the web, and this is equally stellar and also accurate. So let me just have you read and hear with me. David works most recently at the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, a nonprofit in Philadelphia. He's a research scholar at Penn focusing on China and a former Peace Corps volunteer. So apologies, David, for that erroneous web information, and now our audience has got your bio correctly. So dispensing with biographies and opening remarks, we'll go right to two types of questions to gather as much information. The first are open-ended questions. We'll use the same wording to every candidate. They will each have the same amount of time, which will be approximately 2 minutes. And the sequence of the candidates' responses will be varied by me. Each of that has been organized ahead. You're seated 1 through 9, and we've used a random number generator to just put you in a different sequence, each answer for each question. So you don't know when you're coming up. The audience doesn't know, but that's questions. We'll have you use a paddle in front of each candidate, which reflects a binomial response, just a quick way to get input on a series of issues. And so we'll do some lightning round questions that let the paddles gather a lot of information quickly. And finally, the ground rules of our discussion today. The timing has been determined for each of your responses by the number of candidates and the amount of time and the number of questions. Straight math. We would really appreciate you adhering to Alicia. Give us a wave, Alicia. She's our timekeeper. So whine at her when her phone goes off, but would really ask each of you to adhere to those time frames. And when you're really out of bounds, she's going to ring the bell on you. Terrific. We are at 2:06, so we're going to get right to it. Welcome, candidates. Here is our first question. It's January 2019. Congratulations. You won the election. And you're our new U.S. representative from Pennsylvania's 5th District. What's the first piece of legislation that you will work to?
And I think the issues that I talked about in my previous campaigns are even more relevant today. So my first action would be to pass the ban on assault weapons and also work for universal background checks, make sure that domestic abusers are not allowed access to guns, and also terrorists. Terrorists shouldn't be having access to assault weapons or any form of guns. There should be a no-fly. If you can't fly, you shouldn't be able to carry guns. I have members of my family who are in law enforcement, and to think that the people that they need to arrest have better weapons than they do, it's just outrageous. I mean, we can't send numerous marches. I like to say too many marches, too many protests, too many vigils. In 2016, I received the endorsement from the Chester County Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, and I'm a member of the Million Moms Demand Action, and also United, the Delaware County United for Sensible Gun Policies. I think this issue is critical, and I think it definitely has to be the very first issue that I address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shelley Chauncey, congratulations, you won the election, and you're our new U.S. representative from the 5th District. What's the first piece of legislation you'll work to enact, and how will you go about doing it?
Sure. Thank you for having me here today and putting on this function. The first piece of legislation that I would work to enact would be to repair the damage that this current administration has done to our healthcare system. That involves repairing the rollbacks, reinstating the rollbacks that this administration has enacted against the Affordable Care Act. There are millions of people, 22 million people exactly in this country, that is at risk of losing their health insurance or has already lost their health insurance. He has taken away the individual mandate, which was the building block of what the Affordable Care Act was built on, and he's also eliminated the protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. As many of you may know, a little over a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, so I live the fear every day of knowing what it means or what it will mean to lose access to your health insurance because of a pre-existing condition. I also have a son with special needs, who also is facing the same struggles every day. So that would be the first thing that I would do, but I would go further because I believe that healthcare is a human right and not a privilege, and that everybody, regardless of age, regardless of circumstance, regardless of zip code, is entitled to quality healthcare. That includes children, and so while it's great that the current administration
And how will you go about doing it?
First of all, thank you for assembling this. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to present to the folks from Haverford Township. My home community was born and raised in Havertown, and it's wonderful to, can people hear me? It's wonderful to be presenting to you. I am a former congressional staffer, actually was chief of staff to member of Congress for most of the 7 years that I worked on Capitol Hill. So I know how it works, and as a freshman member, I think it's smart to try to advance something narrow and focused. There are many things that I would try to advance. Obviously, gun violence prevention has been core to my values, as has the environment. But I've shared with people, and I can share more about my background through this today. But I had a sister who had a very severe substance abuse problem, and it was all through my life, and it devolved into a heroin addiction. And it didn't end well. And it is something that is, though regrettable, is something unfortunately even more regrettable. It's all too common, particularly in Delaware County, and it is something that is growing at an alarming rate, and we're not putting nearly enough attention. The federal government is not putting nearly enough attention into treatment. To me, healthcare and the sabotage that this administration has been trying to exact on the Affordable Care Act is criminal, and it's unethical and it's immoral. But my focus also will be, in addition to trying to repair what has been harmed in the wake of this administration's assault on healthcare, is to focus on trying to bring additional resources to treatment, because that's our priority, and that's where we're going to see some results. Also going after the pharmaceutical companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Coming now, Molly Sheehan. Congratulations. Meet our new U.S. representative from Pennsylvania's 5th. Molly, what's the first piece of legislation that you will work to enact, and how will you go about doing it?
Thank you all for coming out here today on this snowy March day and putting this wonderful forum on for us. So I think one of the things we have to realize about whatever we're going to do first is that it has to be able to go through a Republican White House for the first 2 years, most likely. And so whatever we want to put through first has to be able to command a bipartisan coalition to put it through. It has to be something we can get people from both sides of the aisle to sign on to. And my priority is healthcare. I've worked in drug and technology development for my career. I've negotiated health plans with insurance companies for a group of 24,000 Pennsylvanians. And I understand that a lot of our differences come on the payment side. And that's where we really hit these walls between each other. And I am in favor of a single-payer health system, but we need to do it in a way that we're not absorbing an inefficient system. We're not absorbing a system that is inherent, has been, the lobbying industry has created all of these corporate handouts in our healthcare system. And if we absorb that system later, when we can get a single-payer system through, then we're just creating more of your tax dollars going to the companies. And so we need legislation that isn't just on the payment side, but is on the efficiency side. Things that we can get bipartisan coalitions behind, because they're not just about payment. Things like making sure that your medical records transfer from one doctor to another. So if you end up in the hospital, they don't give you a drug you're allergic to, and what could be 4 hours doesn't turn into a month. Things like negotiating for drug prices and holding pharmaceuticals accountable. Things like instituting best practice software in hospitals so that all of the radiology and diagnostics that are given are actually useful. And these are really basic technology things that have been done in some hospitals and are really effective, that we can really rein in costs and make sure that when we do inherit the system and we do move to a single payer system, that we're doing it in the most cost-effective way possible and that taxes can stay as low as possible.
Thank you, Molly. David Wertheim, January 2019, you're our new U.S. representative from the 5th District. What's the first piece of legislation you'll work to enact, and how will you go about doing it?
Thanks for that, Ann, and thanks to everyone for coming out and helping organize this. It's great to be in Ludington Library. This is the place where I borrowed many book, crashed on many a term paper in junior high and high school. Used to do research over there on microfilm and microfiche. I don't know if anyone remembers what those words mean. I do. Barely. So this is a really serious question, and I think it requires representatives who don't just think about what Donald Trump's going to pass, but also help to articulate and envision a world after Donald Trump. I think we need to be bold, and I think we need to be progressive. To me, healthcare is the single social and economic justice issue of our times. Now, I come at this from a personal place. I'm from what you would call a Medicaid family. My mom is only 68 years old, but suffers from a rare neurological disorder called PSP. She gets great treatment, but her care would cost us over $10,000 a month as a family, and we simply could never afford that. And so Medicaid is what stands between us and financial disaster. My mom's someone who did everything right. She was a social worker in this area. She ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner when money was tight. She saved for retirement, but it wasn't enough. Medicaid is the retirement plan for a lot of sick seniors in this country. It is the single biggest insurance plan that covers addictive opioid treatment. And it is, for many people, the basis that allows them to make decisions about their economic futures with some degree of certainty. We have to be bold and we have to be strong about reforming healthcare. I want to push for universal single-payer healthcare. We might not get there right away, but we need legislation that allows some kind of Medicare buy-in as a bridge and brings us toward a future that is more equitable and more certain for American families. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Circling to our third candidate, Julie Ebel. You've won the election and are our new U.S. representative from the 5th District. What's the first piece of legislation that you'll work to enact, and how will you go about doing it?
Thank you all for having me. My apologies for being delayed. As many of you know, the roads are kind of crazy this morning with downed trees and blocked streets. My first piece of legislation that I would like to focus on is, again, as other candidates have said, the single-payer healthcare system. I believe that we should extend Medicare for all, and I believe that there are many countries who already have existing systems that we could use as models to go forward on. I do think that a way to, many of the experts feel that instituting this will be a cost savings because of reductions in administrative costs and because of the ability to negotiate for better pricing with pharmaceutical companies and other healthcare providers. So I think that the cost needs to be documented in better ways and brought forward to the Senate as a whole. And I'm hoping that some of the horrible things that we have had happen in the country in the last few weeks will empower the voters to get out there to have their voice heard. Not that people have not been clamoring, but I think we need to continue to clamor. And I think that the opposition to single-payer healthcare will begin to realize that people are going to fight back with their votes. So I think that we have an ability to move people forward in that direction. I would do want to just comment another piece of work that I think is important to go in tandem with that, and that is to do whatever can be done around campaign reform.
Thank you, Julie. We appreciate it. And last, Lindy Lee, congratulations. You're the new U.S. representative from the 5th District. What's the first piece of legislation that you'll work to enact, and how will you go about doing it? And as I ask you to respond, and Alicia provides you all with water to wet your whistle, let me remind each of you to really embrace that microphone so that folks in the way back can be sure to hear your brilliance. Lindy.
Good morning, everyone. Can the folks in the back hear me? The first thing that I would work on is campaign finance reform, because I know that big money has hijacked our democracy. We've institutionalized bribery, and I'm just going to come out and say it. We've sold our democracy to the highest bidders. For every single thing that we care about, there's a special interest impeding progress. And let me give you stark examples. In the aftermath of Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, where 58 people were killed, Sandy Hook, 26 people were slaughtered. And just 2 weeks ago at Parkland, 17 beautiful children and their coaches. We can't do anything because the NRA is standing in the way. I'd love to do something about climate change as well, but we have ExxonMobil, we have the likes of Rex Tillerson, and standing in the way. For every single thing we care about, somebody has bought the politicians. So we have to clean house before we can even do anything about healthcare, what have you, climate change. Whatever issue you care about, there's a special interest that's already lobbying our politicians. And I believe in public servanthood. I believe in politicians only seeing the people as their boss. And the first shall be last. I don't know why. It just breaks my heart to see these politicians abusing our office like that. Until we do something and provide a legislative fix to Citizens United, we can't fix the fundamental issues. So that's something that became legislation that kind of floundered a few years ago. We have to revive something like that. And that's the first piece of legislation that I would fixate on.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you to all of our candidates. And for the audience, I understand from folks who are handling that we're not to see Ashley Luckenheimer today, and we are still expecting Mary Gay Scans. Oh, you are. You've appeared. Well, then you get to go right to work. Welcome. Mary Gay, it's January of 2019. You've won the election, and you are now our new U.S. representative from the 5th District of Pennsylvania. What's the first piece of legislation that you will work to enact, and how will you go about doing it?
And you're going to want to just hug that mic. Got it, yeah.
So it's January 2019. Question is, what happened in the 2018 elections? Were we hijacked by the Russians? I mean, I think that's going to be an issue. What happened in that election? I don't see movement thus far from Congress or the administration to protect our elections. And while there's a lot of issues in front of this country, if we don't have fair elections, how do we get to any of the other issues? So that is a priority for me. If we have not addressed gun control yet, then obviously that's got to be right up there at the top of the list as well. And hopefully, if we have the wave that we're hoping for in this next election, we'll have some fresh faces, some people who aren't beholden to the NRA and are ready to move forward with those initiatives.
Thank you. Okay, candidates. First question behind you. Let's move on. Put your history caps on. Over history, we've repeatedly seen power and money act as corrupting influences. How, as a candidate, will you guard against this trend personally? And if elected, what could Congress, with your help, do to lessen this problem? Now we're in our randomly number generated response, and David, number 9, is going to start us out.
I certainly believe the way candidates concerns, as Mary Gay said, about the integrity of our elections against outside hacking. The White House has done nothing. That's another issue. We need disclosure about which social media ads and posts are being bought and paid for. We need to enforce the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And finally, I think we need a legislative fix to the problem of how corruption is defined. If you look at how the Supreme Court talks about it, they have a very narrow definition, quid pro quo. You have to literally trade a law for a suitcase full of cash in order to be caught up in a legal net. That's not acceptable. We need a Congress that is willing to define corruption for what it actually is, which is if you make decisions that are hopelessly compromised by corporate or special interest money, you're corrupt. If you give selective access to individuals or groups or lobbyists to come into your office and make their home there in exchange for campaign donations, that's corruption. So I think that's where we need to start, with legislation that aligns what the term corruption means with common sense understanding that we have as Americans.
Thank you, David. Moving now to Mary Ellen. History's repeatedly seen power and money act as a corrupting influence. How, as a candidate, would you personally guard against this trend? And if elected, what could Congress, with your help, do to lessen this problem?
Yes, I absolutely agree. Money is a big problem in campaigns. In fact, if you go to my website, MaryEllenForCongress.com, the first thing you'll see is a paragraph that said, I taught political science, and I would say this government, it's a government by the rich, for the rich. This government has the Senate, the nickname for the Senate. When I was in graduate school, it was called the Millionaires Club. And now, not only is the Senate composed of millionaires, but also the House has millionaires in it. And believe me, I'm far, far, far from a millionaire. And I understand the struggle that people have, both with healthcare, as a college professor, I see the students with the high interest rates. I ran against, the party asked me to run in 2014 against Congressman Mann. Do you know that he voted to increase the interest rates on student loans and give a tax break to the less than 1%? To me, that is outrageous, and that's what's going on with these millionaires in Congress. You need people from average people, teachers, but not millionaires. There's a lot we can do. I don't accept money from those big PACs. I've gotten money from the public interest groups. I was supported unanimously, and this is highly unusual, unanimously by the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. I was endorsed by received money also and support from the Pennsylvania Planned Parenthood and also National Planned Parenthood, also supported by the National Organization for Women, numerous other organizations. But this issue is so important to me. It will definitely be one of the priorities because it is impacting our health care and our education for our children and much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you.
Molly Sheehan, power and money, corrupting influences. How will you personally guard against that trend? And if elected, what would you and Congress be able to do to lessen the problem?
Thank you. So I'm also not accepting corporate PAC money. My campaign is financed through grassroots individual donations and the money my family could put into it. And I think that one of the things that gets left out in a lot of these conversations is what the driving force is behind it. That Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex. But what we see now is the corruption of our country from the campaign-industrial complex. That there's this immense force to raise a lot of money to line pockets of consultants, and we see it especially at the national level. And I don't believe systems are going to reform themselves. People who have succeeded in the current system have a vested interest in not changing it. I am for overturning Citizens United, but I believe that most change, especially radical change as this would be, comes from the bottom up. It comes from people like you saying, I'm not going to buy this lie. The lie that you have to be able to have millionaire friends that max out on you. I don't have friends that can donate $5,400 to my campaign. And that lie says that some communities who don't have that kind of money don't deserve representation. That they fundamentally don't deserve to have party support. And that no one will amplify their voices. And so it comes from the grassroots, and this is something I'm personally committed to, that I started a civic tech company that is building a web-based platform to help source volunteers, because we heard through 2016 the left doesn't have a bench, right? But we have all the talent. And how do we source people that make logos, graphic design, automation, lower the cost of campaigns and make it easier with an infrastructure so that it doesn't just take money? And I'm also for public campaign financing. We see places like Seattle give everyone 4 $25 vouchers for their local races. And you know, you see homeless people donating to their city councilors. It's transformative for politics. And I absolutely would write, co-sponsor, and vote for a bill for public campaign financing at the national level.
Thank you, Molly. Coming to Shelley Chauncey next. Power and money, corrupting influences. How, as a candidate, do you personally guard against that trend? And if elected, what would you help Congress to do to lessen the problem?
Sure, thank you. I think I want to start off by saying that committing to not accept money from large corporate PACs is being disingenuous to the process. Because frankly, there are corporate PACs and PACs in general that support very real, important social issues. PACs like Planned Parenthood, like Emily's List, like organizations that are committed to advancing causes for people who don't have a voice for themselves. Will I accept money from the NRA? Not a chance in hell. Will I accept money from people like Comcast and Sunoco? Not a chance in hell. But am I willing to accept money from organizations that speak for the people that don't have a voice? Absolutely. And I'm never going to deny that. Because frankly, unlike many of, if not all of my opponents, I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to donate to my campaign. I've contributed exactly $100 to my campaign, and that was the amount of money that was required for me to open my campaign checking account. So I think it's important to recognize that as voters, that we're not going to handle this problem until we have the ability to stand up and elect individuals who know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, who knows what it's like to be able to fight the good fight against individuals who are funding hundreds of thousands of dollars into their campaign under the auspice that they don't want to be bought. Because to me, that alone says that you're being bought. It says that you are speaking from your own purse. You're speaking with the ability that you have to be able to buy in to a race. And we need to be able to elect individuals who don't have those voices, who understand what it means to be disenfranchised because they don't have the money, who understand what it means to be part of a community who is frequently forgotten. And until we as voters are able to recognize that, we're never going to be able to tackle this problem.
Thank you, Shelley. Coming now to Mary Gay Scanlon. Mary Gay, the Power and Money Act is corrupting influences. How, as a candidate, do you personally guard against the trend? And what, once elected, could you help Congress do to lessen the problem?
There's certainly a lot of challenges in choosing to run for Congress. I thought the initial ones would be getting out in the community, particularly with the short runway that we have this year, touching base with the various interest groups. Touching base with the various interest groups, seeing what people need in their communities. But by far the most daunting thing so far is talking to people who run elections and know how to win elections and having them say, you need to raise money, you need to raise money, you need to raise money. That's all they care about before you even get to talk about the issues. And it's really, really discouraging. However, if that's what it takes, then that's what I'm gonna do. Now, I think like every other candidate up here has said, I don't have vast sums of money. I'm fortunate enough to have been a lawyer for the last 35 years, but I'm not a trust fund baby, neither is my husband. Our folks were teachers and butchers and solid middle class citizens, and whatever we have, we've earned over the course of 30, 40 years in working in the legal field. We've put our kids through college. The fact that our kids are coming out of college now, they've started on their own careers, means that, okay, there's not the same pressure there right now. So we are asking all of our friends and relatives and family members for money in order to try to make this a success. I'm not doing this to fail. If we have to do it that way, then that's the way we have to do it. But that's not the way it should be done, okay? Clearly, we need to roll back Citizens United. We need to institute public financing for elections. Otherwise, what we see, it just perpetuates itself. So there needs to be legislation. You know, my campaign also has, as I think everyone else up here, I don't think anyone here is taking NRA money. I'm not sure that the NRA wants to pay any of us. I mean, obviously, it's a huge, huge problem in our democracy, and it's something that needs to be front and center.
Thank you, Mary Gay. Julie, I'm headed your way. Power and money, corrupting influences. How will you guard against that trend personally? And if elected, what will you help Congress do to lessen the problem?
Thank you. I agree with Shelley that so many of these questions, it's very difficult to come up with an absolutely never this or an absolutely always that. There may be groups that I would accept money from, but certainly they would always be publicly disclosed, and I have a very long list, growing list of those that I would not accept money from. And as just been said, certainly the NRA is probably at the top of that list. One of the biggest problems that we face has been as a result of the Citizens United decision. And as Justice Stevens said in his dissenting opinion, a rejection of the common sense of American people who have recognized the need to prevent corporations, who Julie's add-on to that is corporations don't have a soul, human beings have souls, from undermining self-government. We need to combat that. We need to, I wish I could say I had a clear path forward right now for how to do that, but I do think that the grassroots effort that are growing in this country around so many different issues is a way to have at that and a way to be sure that where we see it, we call it out and we vote accordingly by voting out those politicians who are supporting these large corporations or these large super PACs of the very wealthy at the cost of those who do not have the same amount of wealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Dan Moroff, help us with this thorny issue. Power and money as a corrupting influence. How do you guard against it personally? And what do you, as a member of Congress, do to lessen the problem overall?
Well, I have actually, I don't want to call it a pledge, I've made a commitment, a promise. For Norquest has Republicans sign, no tax pledges, but I have made up. I'm sorry. I have committed not to take corporate PAC money, and I will take PAC money from labor unions. I'll take PAC money from organizations, associations that are like-minded with my views and values. But I think that the corporate influence is corrupting influence. That's the first thing, and I have. It's on my website, and I've been committed to that for a long time. I would, as a member of Congress, I'd want to advance mechanisms for localities, for communities, for states to create public financing mechanisms. They just did it in Philadelphia. They passed a public financing measure, and we're going to see how that works. And I'm excited about it. And it's a great sort of on the vanguard of public financing in Pennsylvania. It's modeled after a New York approach. And I think that is. I think there needs to be more to facilitate localities, municipalities, and states to go forward with that. This is Citizens United is one of the most failed, flawed U.S. Supreme Court decisions in our generation, and it is unfortunately it's like untying a Gordian knot. You got to have a constitutional amendment now to change things. And it is going to be a real problem. It's a real struggle that we have to work with. As a member of Congress, I absolutely want to end Citizens United. I'm thrilled that there is an organization called End Citizens United in Washington. Many of you actually probably receive their emails, as do I. And I applaud their efforts. And it is my hope that there will be consensus. And as I've said many times, not here, but I'll say it now, corporations are not people, only people are people.
Thank you, Dan. And rounding out this question, Lindy Lee, power and money, corrupting influences. How, as a candidate, do you personally act against that trend?